Hi everyone, welcome to our KidsMatter Early Childhood webinar. Look at me, listen to me, be with me, exploring what tuning in means for children, educators and families. Thanks for attending today. My name's Amelia Joyce and I'm a Project Officer at KidsMatter Early Childhood. Some of you might be closely connected to the KidsMatter initiative, but for those of you who haven't been in the past, KidsMatter Early Childhood is an initiative that's funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue. It's grown into what it is today through a partnership between Early Childhood Australia, Beyond Blue and the Australian Psychological Society. Shortly I'll be showing you an outline of today's webinar. However, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many different lands that we're all on today. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and the hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. One way we can all actually be informed by Aboriginal ways of knowing, being and doing. One way that I was recently made aware of was of this notion called Didiri. This is a process or experience of inner deep listening and quiet still awareness. This way of being is essential for having self-awareness, connecting with others and building community. An Aboriginal singer-songwriter called Archie Roach has been quoted as saying, "It does wonders for a person to just be still and listen to someone else. You never know what you'll learn. Please feel free throughout today's webinar to share things that you've learnt by simply being still and listening. You can use the chat to the bottom left of your screen. If chatting isn't actually your cup of tea and you don't want to be seeing that, there is a little triangle to the right of your screen that will just pop a little marker up now for people to see. If you click on that, that can actually disappear the chat section for anyone who's interested. But back to Didiri. In essence, Didiri encapsulates what being in tune is with children, ourselves and others around us. Because Didiri strongly connects to what we will be discussing today, there'll be more information about that available in the additional resources. So I've just popped up here the outline for today. The next 50 minutes or so we'll be just focusing on what tuning in to children is, why it's important, and how the practice of tuning in and aspects of the National Quality Framework can both inform and support each other. In all reality, there's plenty of information today that could probably last a week-long webinar. And I'm sure today's presenters, Judy Radish and Rita Johnston, definitely agree. Myself, Judy and Rita, and the entire KidsMatter Early Childhood team ultimately view today as a beginning conversation about how our roles in what we do through the KidsMatter lens can help us engage with children and support their learning, development and behaviour. The whole KidsMatter team are excited about continuing this conversation into the future, and we have avenues to do that, such as Facebook, our blog and shared thinking. The presenters will be able to respond to some questions posted in the chat, so feel free to pop them up as they come up and we'll draw their attention to them through the night. Feel free to also respond to people's questions too and offer reflections about that, but please it's important to remember to remain respectful and caring in any responses or online discussions that we have. In working with children and people, we hear stories and witness or experience times that are stressful, leave us with questions or facing difficult or uncomfortable emotions. The process of experiencing the webinar and reflecting on the topic of tuning in with children might trigger some difficult feelings for you. So before we begin, please take a moment to plan what you will do if this happens for you. On the screen you can see some links to places where you can actually access more support. The final link down the bottom is a link to our website, and that has contact details of places that you can go to, but it also has a self-care message that's been created by people participating in the KidsMatter initiative. So throughout the night, we've mentioned the chat, but another way for us to interact with you is through polls. So we're going to pop up a poll now, talking a little bit about what experience people have had of webinars. So if you can just take a moment to pop that up, we'll just pop that up. Bear with me a second. So we're just popping that up. And if you can take a moment to fill in what it is that how you've participated in the webinar. Now I'm just confirming that you can all see that with my person that's helping me. Has that come up for people to see? No, no one's seeing it. We'll try again. Bear with me here. No, we've had an issue with that one. So we'll move on from that. Some people can see it and some people can't. We'll try again.
Oh, yes.
There we go. Looks like it's working this time for us. Yes. So take some time to fill that in. We'll do it as quickly as we can, just so people can get a bit of practice, and I can get a bit of practice too in getting them up. Give it a few more moments. We can see people, there's quite a mix actually that seems to be coming up. Okay, wait for the last little bits. And we'll stop the poll now. And just so that you can see who's here. There we go. So we've got some people who've had this is the first experience of a webinar. We've also got people who've participated in many webinars before. And it's great to see that we've got lots of new people to see KidsMatter Early Childhood webinars as well. 43% of you, this is your first KidsMatter Early Childhood webinar. So hopefully we'll see you again. And welcome back to those who participated in our last one. So from there, we've all practiced how to do polls, and looks like lots of people are having a go with the chat. And thanks for helping me out with that, everyone. So for now, I'm going to hand over now to Rita, and she's going to start talking with us all a little bit about what the role of relationships play in learning. Thanks, Rita.
Okay, hi everyone. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. It's my first time presenting at a webinar. And it's great to be here to share some of the information and research about the place of relationships in early childhood development and children's longer-term mental health and well-being. Babies and children need relationships to grow, thrive and flourish physically, emotionally, mentally and spiritually. And we hear this regularly, but do we really know why this is true? When children are in positive relationships, they feel safe and secure, they feel loved and valued. So think about yourself for a moment and think about a positive relationship that you have or that you'd like to have that's safe and secure, where you feel loved and valued. Just thinking about that sort of relationship might make your body start to relax. You might feel a calmness and an easing of stress just at the thought of that relationship. So this is the feeling of calm flow that children need for their biology to work at its optimum level. Without positive relationships, the infant or child becomes stressed, and current research shows us that the stressed brain can't grow, and that actually the stress can shrink brain networks. And I'll say more about this later. So you might have even seen the image of the brain of a 3-year-old severely neglected child that's only 2/3 the size of the brain of the normal 3-year-old child. So let's explore a little bit now on the types of relationships that children need to grow and learn. So some of the descriptions of these type of relationships and interactions that children need might be called being with, tuning in, or serve and return interactions. So what do these interactions look like? In serve and return interactions, the baby or the child makes an overture. The baby smiles, the baby might point at something, the baby might make some sounds, the child might come and ask a question or make a statement. And then the adult responds with smiles, gestures, eye contact, words and responses. And then the baby responds to the adult and the adult responds to the child or baby. So it's like a game of tennis with the conversation going between the child, babe, adult, child, adult. As together as a team, the child or baby and the adult look for meaning and connection in that relationship. So serve and return, being with and tuning in, happens both verbally and non-verbally. And sometimes body language is all that's needed, a reassuring smile, a nod of a head, or a welcoming gesture. It's through serve and return, being with and tuning in, that babies and children's brains grow and that all learning takes place. So, for example, in a recent study, it showed that infants whose mothers either ignored their babbling or shifted the baby's attention to somewhere else. So now I'll hand over to Judy, who will talk about the place of relationships in the Early Years Learning Framework and the National Quality Standard. So I think
I'm on here now. Hi everybody, my name's Judy Radish and I'm Director of a long day care centre in Tweed Heads, and I guess I've been involved with KidsMatter right from the beginning as one of the pilot programs. And I guess for me, when the Early Years Learning Framework came out and then the National Quality Standards and KidsMatter was rolling out as well, that it was easy to think, oh no, KidsMatter is just something else we have to do on top of the Early Years Learning Framework and getting through the National Quality Standards. But I guess what I'm here today to do is to draw some connection between tuning in with children and being with children and being in the moment and the Early Years Learning Framework and the National Quality Standard. I think this topic really interests me because I think we often become so busy in our day-to-day work with children that we often get so busy we actually just forget to sit and be with children. So I'm hoping that that Rita's knowledge about why relationships really matter and some of my information that's more of a practice-based will support you in thinking again about relationships in the work that you do with children and families. I guess I thought before we looked at the areas in the National Quality Standard that focus on relationships, we need to go back to belonging, being and becoming, the Early Years Learning Framework, and look and see what principles, practices and learning outcomes that will support us to see relationships at the core of what we do. So if we think about the principles, the major ones will be secure, respectful and reciprocal relationships, our partnerships with families, our respect for diversity, and our ongoing learning and reflective practice. And I guess that's why you're all tuned in tonight, because you all want to think about your own practice and perhaps think about things differently into the future. When we talk about the Early Years Learning Framework practices, we talk about a holistic approach. And in early childhood, we know that we don't just do one thing in isolation, that we do look at the whole child. And in practices, we also look at responsiveness to children. I think the key learning outcomes in the Early Years Learning Framework that focus on relationships are the learning outcome 1, children have a strong sense of identity. Learning outcome 3, children have a strong sense of well-being. And learning outcome 5, children are effective communicators. And with that I mean the verbal and the non-verbal communicators. And children do that for a range of purposes. As you know, the National Quality Standard has put a pressure on a lot of us because we all have to be assessed against it. And I guess what I'm hoping that we might do, or might make you think you do in this webinar tonight, is really think hard about if we understand and work with the Early Years Learning Framework really well, we'll actually do well in the National Quality Standard. As you know, National Quality Area 5 in the NQS is explicitly about relationships. And there is an expectation that all educators will build strong relationships with children, and these will be sensitive and respectful, and give children skills to develop and maintain relationships with others for life. We know, as I said before, that relationships do not happen in isolation. So we need to think about relationships, relationship building and tuning into children when we're designing our educational program. And I think this is something that I sometimes see when our written program is focused on activities. We're so busy putting out equipment, keeping it tidy and attractive for children that we don't have time to just sit, watch, engage and respond to children. When we give babies paint, we don't have time to build the sort of relationships that Rita's spoken about. We're so busy cleaning up after them as they eat the paint themselves and the furniture. So we have to think about why we do what we do, and does it really enable us to build these kind of long-term relationships with children and I guess with families. When we see ourselves as always in charge, which I guess is a bit, when you're a teacher you are kind of in charge, but I think in early childhood it's slightly different. And if we think of ourselves as always having to be the leader, always in charge, it's hard for us to make time to really listen to children. And I guess some of the terminology like agency in the early years learning framework will make us stop and think about that. I think National Quality 3, the physical environment, is a standard which we can think about and support children to build and maintain relationships. When we think about the spaces we create for children, where they can be alone, where they can be with peers, how comfortable do we make it for educators to sit on the floor or sit on the ground and just be with children, so we don't have educators standing up outside but they're down on the ground listening with children. When we think about National Quality Standard 2 around health and safety, that too impacts on how we build and maintain relationships. I had a relief educator recently who was so busy thinking she had to do a nappy change routine. She had no time to be playful, engaging with the children as she changed an individual nappy or spent time with the other children. That seemed to be her focus. When we allow these routines, even though they are important, to override other parts of our day, it's hard to stay in the moment. It really interests me, and I'm guilty of it too, that we often keep statistics on nappy changes and the content of those nappies, but we don't keep statistics on how often we connected each day with all of the children in our care and education environments. I'm certainly not suggesting we need another form to fill out, but rather something that we can consciously do all day. So when we reflect on our day ourselves, think about the times that we connected and really tuned in to all of the children. In thinking also about the conversations that we have with children each day, are we really aware of the content of these? Can we minimize the directional conversations we have with children to build relationships? So if we're always saying, it's time for lunch, pick up your wet clothes, what do you need when playing outside? We need to find time to build on the conversational and limit the directional conversations with children. I think National Quality Standard 4 also on staffing also gives us opportunities to think about what really matters for children. And some of us may have some capacity to rethink staffing priorities to foster long and engaging conversations with families. National Quality Standard 6 also, working with and building relationships with families, makes me consider how we might have or make time to connect with every child and family at arrival and departure time. I think, this is really hard, but it is really, really important, and so it is about rethinking how we manage that. In thinking about how we relate to families too, I think we often need to be aware of who and how often we have friendly and regular conversations with, and how this might be perceived by others who perhaps aren't as easy to have conversations with or perhaps are new to a service. When we allow ourselves time to think about tuning into children to be the focus of our work, we can see possibilities around how we might plan and manage our day differently. Like me, I'm sure you've had days where you felt frustrated and achieved nothing. I had one of those in the office today, but I wasn't with the children. Relationships with children are too important to have these days too often. There is an expectation of the early years learning framework when it asks us to critically reflect on what we do and why. Thank you.
Hi everyone, we're up to another poll now. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have a little think about what we think tuning in is. So I'm just popping it up on the screen for us now. Again, this is a multiple choice question, so just pick the one or the ones that you feel are the most representative of what tuning in is. So whether it's teaching a skill, directing a wandering child to an activity, being sensitive to and responding to a child's needs and cues, distracting a child from a difficult feeling, or responding in ways that fit with a child. Rita and Judy, would you like to make a comment about any of these points that we've put up as questions?
Well, I'm noticing straight away that that initially everyone went for answer 3, and so that's nearly 91%, and answer 5 is around 50%. And there's a couple of people now that are going in for number 2, directing a wandering child to an activity, and number 3 for distracting a child from a difficult feeling, and teaching a skill.
Yep. I'm going to stop the poll now, Rita.
Yep.
So we'll stop the poll so everyone can see it. See the results.
So I'll just say a couple of things. One is that there are sort of 2 right answers. Both 3 and 5 are good, fairly good descriptions of what tuning in is. Actually, it's the ones that we used in KidsMatter in our professional learning. And I can see that's the ones everyone went for. Now, I want to sort of just speak for a moment about answer 4, distracting a child from a difficult feeling. While often when a child has a difficult feeling, it's upsetting for the adult or the educator, I want to say that distracting a child from a difficult feeling is not the best way to help the child through that feeling. This really goes back to being with and tuning in. If the word there had been being with a child with a difficult feeling, or sitting with a child with a difficult feeling, or talking with a child about who's having a difficult feeling, then I would say, yeah, that's sort of tuning in. But distracting is saying that your difficult feeling is not valued and you need to get rid of it as quickly as you can. And that's really what our society has taught us. And component 2 in KidsMatter really talks about more deeply about how we work with children and feelings in relationships. And a part of that journey is to look at how we feel about our own difficult feelings. If we're not comfortable with anger, if we've had a very angry parent, for example, and find anger frightening, then we might not be able to help an angry child just pass through that anger in a healthy way. So that's all I'll say about that. And I don't know if Judy...
I guess that brings up that whole notion of tuning in really starts with tuning into yourself as well, doesn't it, Judy?
It certainly does. I mean, you can't... Well, yes, I'd just say that, yes, we can't tune into children and families if we're not really tuned into ourselves. So I think I'll touch on a little bit of that a bit later on. But that's certainly important.
Excellent. Thanks, Judy. Okay, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to move on, and Rita's going to talk a little bit about the research behind tuning in. Thanks, Rita.
Okay, thank you. So as early childhood educators, we've been hearing for a long time now that relationships are at the heart of early childhood development. But how does this information, and more importantly, how does our knowledge and understanding of this information affect or influence our practice? So I'd like to share some of the research stories that had a big impact on me and my understanding of the importance of relationships and had an impact on my practice with children and families. So first I want to say something about relationships and physical development, and I mentioned that briefly earlier on. So there's a piece of research that I think is fantastic. It's so interesting. In 1945, a researcher by the name of Rene Spitz suspected that to thrive, babies needed more than just their physical needs being taken care of. So Spitz decided, in America, decided to compare 2 groups of babies, both in institutional settings. So the first group was in an orphanage and you can see from the photo on the slide a little bit how they might have been in that orphanage. And the second group of babies was in a different institution, in a prison with their mothers. So both environments were clean and the babies were physically well taken care of. They had enough food, they were changed, their nappies were changed. So physically the children were taken care of in both environments. So in the prison rather, the babies were in the nursery during the day and then they were with their mothers in the evening and all through the night. So you might already guess what the difference of outcomes was in the two populations, but I will tell you. So the orphanage babies had a 30% death rate, high levels of infection and illness, poor growth, so they didn't actually grow to their normal levels, and they had social and emotional problems. And this was true not just in the orphanage that Spitz was studying, but in all the orphanages around in the United States and probably around the world at that time. The prison babies, on the other hand, had no deaths, far fewer infections, and they had typical growth and development in all areas, in physical, social and emotional. So the conclusion is obvious, and I'll quote what Bruce Perry says. He says, "The empathic connections the prisoners' babies made with their mothers literally saved their lives. Lack of love was what was killing the orphanage children, not unsterile group living." So we've learned from this study and from other research over the years that there's a hormone called human growth hormone, and it's only activated by frequent, individualised and frequent physical affection for babies and children. So if babies don't get that, they don't grow. And without empathic relationships, babies can't survive very well physically, let alone emotionally. So let's talk about babies' emotional development. So I've talked about relationships that are crucial for babies to actually live and grow. What about their emotional development? Babies and children are biologically designed to connect and to be in relationship. In 1975, a developmental psychologist called Ed Tronick developed a series of experiments called the still-faced experiment to illustrate this. So you'll see in that first picture, it's a split screen, and what they've done is the baby's sitting in a baby seat and the mother's facing the baby and interacting with the baby. And they've got two cameras so we can see exactly what the mother's face looks like and the baby's face looks like at the same time. So initially the mother's engaging and playing with the baby and tuning in, having a serve and return interaction and being with. They're connected, they're talking to each other, they're in relationship with each other. So after a couple of minutes, the mother's asked to turn away, and then when she turns back, to have a still face. Not to engage in being with, tuning in, or serve and return interactions. So you can see that different face from the first picture to the second picture. So initially, the baby tries to re-engage the mother. She smiles, she points at something in the room because normally her mother looks to where she points. She puts her arms out. Eventually she makes this high screeching noise as if to say, "What's going on?" And she becomes, finally, the baby becomes really distressed. She loses her posture. She cries and she turns away and sobs in a really distressed way. Now we don't leave the baby like that. Shortly after, the mother re-engages with the baby, who then settles quickly and interacts happily with the mother again. So but what does this still face experiment tell us? And this in subsequent research tells us that when babies and children don't get the relationship response that they're biologically designed for, their stress hormones rise. When babies and children are stressed, they'll find it difficult, if not impossible, to regulate their feelings, their thoughts and behaviour. So no relationship, high stress leads to dysregulation. When the babies and children are stressed, The frontal part, that front part of the brain, the frontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that we think with, is literally switched off and they can't learn. And if the lack of relationship goes on for the longer term, the stress hormones stay high. And this in turn can affect the lifelong expression of the stress gene, the actual DNA, making it more difficult as an adult to regulate stress responses. So as adults, these relationship deficit babies and children will tend, and those people might be some of us, will tend to have stress responses that start sooner, that don't need as strong a stimulus to get them going. They're more intense and they get very intense very quickly, and they take longer to settle down after the stress event has concluded. So stress babies, relationship deficit babies make stressed adults who find it difficult to cope. So stressed brains not only don't grow physically, but they become emotionally dysregulated and they can't learn. When the brain's flooded with stress chemicals, even if the child looks calm on the outside, little learning can take place. When babies and children lack the relationships they need, they can't develop socially and emotionally, and mental health and well-being is severely compromised.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm back again. So we're going to do another poll now, and it's talking a little bit about hoping you can have a think about the biggest challenges to tuning in, what they are. So what gets in the way? I'll pop it up right now. So there, we've got lots of options. Again, choose the one that either you think is the most or the most challenging, or you can use multiple suggestions as well. Wow, it's going ahead now. So there's been a few questions and comments that have come up throughout tonight. There's been some great stuff people have been talking about in the chat around communicating, and someone mentions about communication for tuning in as around doing a dance, which was a lovely analogy to put towards it. There was also someone that's just mentioned that when you were speaking, Rita, around the still face experiment that occurred, they're working with blind children, so how children who have those special needs actually get the feedback that they need, and there's different ways that it occurs as well. So are there any comments that you'd like to add, Judy, while I stop the poll and pop the results up to see what everyone's put?
I think it is really interesting. I mean, I'm interested in how we build relationships with blind children, and obviously there's more about touch and those kind of things that we'd implement with those children rather than the face. So, and touch and feel, I guess, would be the ways that you would build those relationships with those children. And but I guess it's like everyone, all children will respond differently, all individual children, whether they've got an additional need like a blind child, but all children will respond to our responses probably in different ways and prefer us to respond to them in ways that suit them, and that might be smiling, or it might be physical, or it might be something else. It might be soft words or singing or something. So I guess it's about being in tune, is really understanding how that child likes to be responded to and with.
Yep. And so we've popped. Sorry, Rita.
When you see the mother engaging with the child, it's not just her face. She uses her hands and her voice and her body language. And it's interesting with voice too that even if you can't see someone's face, if you're talking, for example, on the phone, you can often hear if they're smiling and happy just by their tone of voice, rather than if they're flat and grumpy. So, you know, children get their cues in so many different ways.
They do. And so everyone can probably see the poll results. What I've noticed in the chat, competing demands has been, and time limitations have been high scorers in our poll. Some things that people have also mentioned is around paperwork, and there's a few differing views around how paperwork can get in the way or how it can actually support. Do either of you have any comments around that?
I mean, I guess it's interesting for me to see that, because I think sometimes if we don't really understand well about what we're doing, we do get bogged down in the paperwork, and it's easy to write more instead of actually thinking, who am I writing this for? You know, what does it mean? Can I say it in less words? Do I have to do it the way we've always done it? And I guess what we're hoping that people might get out of this webinar today is to say, you know, how can I free up my time? What can I do less of? I mean, if we're writing things to parents every day and they never read it, why are we doing it? And I think sometimes we read things into the National Quality Standard or the regulations that perhaps aren't there. So I know none of us get enough time, but I think if we have real understandings about the significance of relationships, we are able to sell it to others and make small changes into big changes.
And I guess that topic actually leads on really nicely to what you're going to talk about next. Yeah, you can. Would you like to say something? Yeah, go for it.
It's about there were a lot of people saying there were too many children to tune into as well. So that concept of, with the child, of the emotional cup. So children don't need us to be tuned in with all of them all the time, all day. It's about being tuned in with them enough so that then they can go off and be independent and explore and learn on their own. And so, so what you'll find is that if you actually take the time to really tune into children, they actually all end up being less demanding because they've got what they need emotionally. And they, in the end, initially it might be a lot more of your time taken, but after a week or 2 or 3 or 4, you'll actually find you've got more time. And I say that from personal experience.
Yes, Rita, we had an experience where we had a 18-month-old, can you hear me? And he wandered around with his arms up, and to me that means he's really telling us we need to pick him up. But I did have a staff member who said, well, we can't pick him up because we can't pick them all up. And I said, well, you need to pick him up. The others aren't putting their hands up to be picked up. And, you know, we only had to pick him up, you know, lots of times throughout the day. And, you know, it didn't take long for him to be feeling safe and comfortable and able to go off. So he didn't need to be picked up forever. He just needed it for those short periods of time, and it really does work. So that's once again about thinking about children as individuals, not just because one needs it, they all need it, and it's not fair. It's about what each child needs.
Yep. Thanks, Judy, and that's a great way of demonstrating non-verbal communication as well. So it doesn't sound like there were many words there. It was just all in actions. So let's move on to talking a little bit more about finding time. So Judy's going to spend some time around some strategies that we can maybe do to find more time to do this tuning in.
We'd all like more time, but yeah, I said we'd all like more time. Thanks, Amelia. But, you know, that's not our reality and that's not our workplace. So I just think there's a few things that maybe we can think about differently. And I don't know about any of you, but I find for me, I need to be ready for the day. So it means I'm not, you know, racing into the car park, flying out of my car, dropping my phone and having it break like it did this morning. But it means coming in for work before my shift starts and, you know, having a cup of tea, perhaps having a sit down, going to the bathroom, all of those things, and perhaps leaving my morning at home behind. And what I'm dealing with up on the border is now that I live in Queensland, and so where I work in New South Wales, the time is an hour earlier. So instead of leaving home now at 7 o'clock to get to work by 7:30, 7:45, I leave home at 6 o'clock my time to get to work by 7:45, 7:45. So, you know, I do have to find some ways for myself to not feel pressured by that and, you know, just to take it easy and go along with it a little bit. So I think being prepared is when we come into work is really, really important. And I think we have to assume that today's going to be a good day. Today's a new beginning. So if we come in thinking that Kobe's going to test me again today, you know what? Kobe will test me. So I think some of it we just have to think today is a fresh day and I have to find ways to be with all of those children. It's another day. I think another way we can do it is think about our arrival times, and that's something that we in my workplace have thought quite long and hard about it. And it can be busy and it can be chaotic, but you know, how does it work? I guess for us we like to be available to children, families, and I certainly like to be available to the other staff. But in our service, how it's set up is that we arrive as the children arrive. So we don't actually set up any experiences on tabletops for children. There's a whole range of experiences that are set up for children all day and every day. The staff on the shift at the end of the day make sure all the paints and the glue's available on shelving that children have access to. So we're not racing around in the morning trying to put things out. We've negotiated with our cleaners who clean the floors every night to put the chairs back around the tables. So it's all there for children. And that for me means that we do have a bit more time to spend time with those parents who need us to spend time with them, and certainly spend time with that children in that important transition from home to school, if you like. Other services do it differently. Some services do pay staff to come in beforehand, but I guess for me I'm trying to think about ways that we can move away thinking we have to provide all the activities to saying how can we make children make those decisions and do that. Sometimes I think I find with some of my staff anyway that some families seem to dominate their time, and I think as staff we need to develop strategies to say, excuse me, I just need to do this and be noticing what's happening over somewhere else, and can I phone you later, or can I talk to you later about what we're talking about. So freeing ourselves, being aware of how we're spending our time at those important times of the day. And finding ways to work through it. I know if we've got people have got enough staff to actually just be an observer in the room is a really, really useful tool. Some of my staff planning time, I get them just to sit in the room. Obviously they don't ignore the children if the children come up to them, but just they haven't really got any teaching responsibilities for perhaps an hour or so over different parts of the day. So that really enables them to perhaps see what busy educators are doing or not doing, and to think about how they might plan for some of those things differently. Certainly when I first started working in long day care, which was a long time ago now, but I was a teaching director, and I found it one of the most challenging things in my whole early childhood career. I felt I wasn't anybody. I was never in the moment for children, because if I was in the room I was thinking about the admin that was backing up, and if I was in the office I was thinking about the children and that I should have been out there with them, and how I was letting the other staff down because I wasn't available. So we came to some negotiation, and I'm non-teaching director now, but I still go into the rooms at times. But that certainly works for me, and it enables me to be in the moment with children. I think sometimes we forget that we can often too connect with children while we're doing other things. If you do have to go to the phone, you know, you can hold the hand of the child that was sitting on your lap. You can run your fingers through their hair. So there's a few things we do if we're really aware of being available to that child. We have to find ways still to connect and not just abandon them because we've been called to do something else. I think one of our biggest challenges in making time and finding time to build these relationships that really matter, how can our routine times be managed differently? Things such as meals, nappy change, sleep times. How do they allow us to be in the moment rather than an event that we have to get over with as quickly as possible? And certainly Rita's left us with no misunderstanding that relationships really matter. And so how can we find ways that build stronger relationships with children and allow us to be in the moment, and that's respectful for children, and so that children drive our day rather than the routines and the other demands of the day. I think and this gets back to the paperwork again, I think we need to find ways to write written plans that can be achieved rather than try and pack too much into a day. I guess for our service, since we've started to plan for relationships rather than activities and experiences for children, we've gone from writing weekly plans to fortnightly plans to monthly to 3 monthly plans for babies and younger children, because you know, we know that relationship building doesn't just happen in a day or in a week or a month even. So that's freed up some more time to say, well, this is what we want to achieve, and so we reflect on those monthly or bi-monthly plans and change some of our strategies, but we're really not coming up with new ideas every month or every 2 months. It looks very similar. I guess what I see, and I'm sure all of those of you who work in services see, is that, you know, children's lives are very hectic now, and children are often bundled out of bed, bundled in the car, and bundled into childcare. And you know, I think my 4-year-old son, and that was a while ago too, when he was 4, and he used to come to work with me, and he said to me one day, he said, "Can we please just stay at home today, Mum?" And it really made me think that I really wasn't tuned in very well to him. And, you know, I mean, it wasn't possible to stay home that day, but we did make some time soon after so that we could both just stay at home and hang around in our jammies and, you know, have a quiet day. But I notice we've just had the school holidays where I am, and you know, often older children are off on school holidays and the little ones still have to come to childcare because perhaps it's because parents pay, or perhaps they want to do something special for their older children. But sometimes, you know, I think it's a bit tough on children, and I think if we can support parents to tune in to their children, that's a big part of the role that we play as well. So, you know, thinking about when they have holidays, could they please let their children have a bit of a holiday from a 52-week program, and so children get a chance to as well just be with their parents. And I guess the other quick thing I'd just say about documentation is, you know, are we so focused on documenting children's learning and taking photos that we use or don't use that we forget to connect? And I think we all need some little reminders, including me, about some of those things.
That's a great way to lead into our next poll, Judy. Our next poll is looking, we would like you all to have a think about a child that you know really well, and then think about a child that you don't know quite so well, and just consider in what ways have you been tuning in with each child, and whether or not it's different or what you could do differently as well. So I'll just pop the poll up now for you to have a look at. And yeah, so have a think about the 2 children. So we've got lots of people talking about it sometimes as well, and often it's coming up also. So there's been a lot of chat happening as well while we wait for people to pop their little bits in. And some of the questions, have any of the questions stuck out for you, Rita, at all, or Judy? Oh, Rita's not with us yet. We'll wait a moment for Rita to pop in. Thanks, Rita.
Yeah, I liked what Judy was saying about the long-term planning, and also there was some chat about planning over a much longer period. Like, you know, I mean, when I was teaching in preschool, my foundational sort of plan was for, you know, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 10 weeks, and then the variations would run through that. But there was always that stable plan and environment, as Judy was saying, with everything out on the shelves all the time. So you're packing, you know, so we weren't packing away all the time.
Yep, great. I've just posted the results, and people have gone. on to mainly sometimes and quite often as well. So there's lots of intentionality by the looks of it around how we're tuning in with each other. While we finish off for the evening, you can also maybe have a think about what you could do in those times when maybe you haven't been as in tune with the child as what you would like, and feel free to pop in the chat if there's one particular action that you think that you might be able to try tomorrow or in the next period of time. So what we'll do is we'll move on to the next part, where Judy's actually tying in a little bit around how tuning in and quality improvement plans can be supported. So thanks, Judy.
Thanks, Amelia. Yes, I guess because we are trying to tie in the idea of tuning in for children, and which is a big KidsMatter component, and the National Quality Standard, and as you know, all of us have to do a quality improvement plan. So for me, I think the quality improvement plan can be a really useful tool in you know, thinking about and changing our practice. And I guess what I'm suggesting is that we might move away from just looking at each quality area in isolation as is suggested in the ASEQA template to a more holistic approach around a particular area of learning. So if we say relationships matter, tuning in matters, being in the moment matters, we can work through these in a systematic way to improve practice through the quality improvement plan. This might be a whole of service approach, or perhaps it might be easier to begin with babies, but I think, as Rita said earlier, you know, relationships are really, really important for babies, but they're really, really important for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds and beyond, and for ourselves. So for me, it doesn't just begin and end with younger children, and I'd urge you to think of meeting the needs of the older children in this way as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Plan, Do, Review process in the KidsMatter Early Childhood program, and I'm sure Amelia will provide you with a link in some further materials, but that might be another useful tool that you might use in your service in thinking about changing practices or enhancing practices. You know, as I said before, we know that all parts of the EYLF and the National Quality Standard do not exist in isolation. So to only focus on, say, Quality Area 5 relationships misses the great opportunity that this approach has on many other parts of the curriculum. We know we all approach change and innovation differently, and this approach will take more professional conversations and perhaps more professional development as a team to begin to work this way. Of course, you know, change is difficult for some people, and so you might have an energized educator who often sees herself as the entertainer, the provider of most of the new ideas, and may feel threatened by saying, let's pull back from always having to provide activities. Let's think about relationships. And I don't know about you, but I know every time I sit down at the Play-Doh table, which the children have all had every day nearly for the last 5 years, there's always a pool of children that swarm around and are happy to do the same experience, if you like, because there's someone there tuning into them and being with them. I guess another educator might think they already work that way, and that's great because they might be able to support others to think more about how relationships are the focus for most of their work. Another educator may feel exhausted, and I'm sure we've all felt exhausted at sometimes in our careers, at just another thing to think about. But I guess what I'd say, if we think about relationships, it allows us all to actually slow down, cut back the pace a little bit and sit down and just be there, and perhaps get back to some of those basics, although I think that does make me sound very old by talking about back to basics. But I guess all of the thoughts that your staff team will have are legitimate, and you know, we need to give educators time to work through those. So another way might be for you to, if you're thinking about changing what happens there, might be to video what happens at certain times of the day, or you know, throughout a morning or perhaps a busy period, to really reflect and look and see what's happening, and not play it back to staff in a way to criticise what's happening, but to get a really, really good picture of what's really happening. So I know with my staff I'll often just say as they're leaving the door, tell me about your relationship with so-and-so and so-and-so. And so they're really thinking about what happened for those children and to getting them to document some of that thing on the day. I think also we can keep reflective journals, which I know many of you do, and staff can keep their own reflective journal about what they did well and perhaps what they need to do better. I know we all come in with good intentions, but we are human beings, and we do, you know, it is easier for us to like some children more than we like others, and as educators we have to move away from that. But I do think we need to be reminded and be intentional about our tuning in with all of the children. I think it's really important, and I guess this gets back to perhaps management wanting us to be, you know, always taking something, children need to take something home or whatever. But I think if we work through relationships that the focus is our work in this systematic way, over time we'll get everyone on board. I guess just likewise it's really important to talk to parents at the end of each day about the kind of tuning in that happened with their child, rather than perhaps they liked climbing or, you know, or doing a painting or whatever. So I think if we keep parents informed about their emotional well-being, we're on the way to them being really happy with the approach to relationships that we might take into the future. So I guess what I'm suggesting is if we try new things, we might all be less harried as educators, and we'll have calmer children and calmer adults and calmer families, and I think focusing on relationships allows us to do that. So thank you.
So we're all back again for our few final thoughts at the very end of the session. We've got a few minutes left, so we'll just have a quick sum up of what we've covered tonight, and it's quite clear in 3 points here from Rita. So Rita, I'll just hand over to you to have a quick comment about your 3 points that you've put up here.
Okay, so very quickly, we've only got 3 minutes, I think. So there's 3 important things that will help you put this into practice. Number 1, be open to change. But don't worry if you or members of your team feel resistance to change as well. That's important. So give yourselves time and space to grow and change. And one simple way to be open to change is to set an intention. So the intention could be as simple as, I allow myself to tune in more as I work with children today. And you can write that and put that up on the wall of your room and read it every morning, and then just watch what happens. Once you've set an intention, you want to keep the momentum going. So that's through continuous learning. So that's through reading, through looking at information on the internet, through all sorts of resources that Amelia will talk more about. And I know for myself that every time I read something new about children's brain development or their social emotional growth, I get really re-excited and reignited about the topic. And finally, keep reflecting on your practice. Reflect on what you're doing, on how you're going with your intention, on your successes and challenges, and then share these reflections with colleagues. It's through speaking and writing about what we're doing that we gain more insight, and speaking and writing about what we're doing actually embeds our new learning and changes in our practice. And so finally, I just want to say, a good, satisfying and happy life is not about winning, it's not about being the first or best, it's not about money and possessions. It is truly about relationships. As a society, we are slowly realising that relationships, the positive feelings between two people, are what promotes physical health and mental health and well-being in all of us. And so as you deepen your relationships with children, being with, tuning in, having serve and return interactions, you'll find that not only does the child flourish, but you do as well. So tomorrow morning, instead of being on the floor, start being with the children. So thank you for listening.
Excellent. Thanks, Rita.
I'll hand over to Judy.
Thanks, Rita. Excellent.
Okay, I've just got a little poem really that was adapted from High Scope, which I went to years ago, and it's called Enabling Children to Be Their Very Best. I've come to a frightening conclusion that I am the decisive element in my classroom. It's my personal approach that creates the climate It's my daily mood that makes the weather. As a teacher, I have tremendous power to make a child's life miserable or joyous. I can be a tool of torture or an instrument of inspiration. I can humiliate or humour, hurt or heal. In all situations, it is my response that decides whether a crisis will be escalated or de-escalated and a child humanised or dehumanised. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Judy. That sums up really well what we've been looking at today. And I'm just about to say goodbye. I'd just like to draw your attention to ways that you can continue the conversation. We've got Facebook, Twitter, Shared Thinking blog, and our website. So please feel free to touch base with us about anything that's come up tonight. I've also popped in a link to a blog where you'll actually be able to access all the slides and the resources that have come out of tonight, and the recording will be available there too in a day or so. So you'll get an email all about that. So thanks for joining us tonight, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you on the Shared Thinking blog or on Facebook and at our next webinars. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.